Well, the Investing in African Mining Indaba has kicked off in Cape Town. Miners and financiers are gathered there to connect and explore investments on the continent. The presidents of Botswana, Mokgweetsi, Masisi, and Zambia's Hakainde, Hichilema addressed the Mining Indaba. The Minister of Mineral Resources and Energy, Mantashe, officially opened the proceedings. Addressing the conference, President Hichilema committed to working hard on clearing all hurdles to doing business in Zambia, including efforts to deal decisively with corruption. Now, this year's theme is entitled Evolution of African Mining, Investing in the Energy Transition, ESG and Economies. The event will run until the 12th of May. Helping us unpack some of what may happen is Dolika Banda, who's the board chairperson of Zambia's ZCCM-Investments Holdings, which is Zambia's leading mining company. And she joins us via Zoom from Cape Town. Thank you very much indeed for joining us and welcome to the program.
Thank you very much. It is an honor and a pleasure to be here.
All right, so why is the Mining Indaba important for people like you, your company, and Zambia in general?
Thank you very much. So let me start by saying mining is important to this whole region. And I think South Africa knows that better than any, which is the reason why we are now in the mother city, hosting this important role and conference, which has been done here for so many years. I don't think you can write the history of Africa without including mining, or the history of mining without including Africa, particularly Southern Africa. It has played an important and critical role in all of our lives. It is part of our economic mainstay. Zambia's industry was there before we gained independence. After independence around 1969, it was nationalized. Sadly, at that time, we were producing 700,000 metric tons of copper a year and contributing over 50% of government's revenue. And 10 years after we took over the reins, we were producing 200 metric tons over the year. As of this year, the story has improved, but I am here and I know my president is here and the other presidents, and we're being hosted by South Africa because there is a wave and a rise in the price of commodities. And it is important this year that we take advantage of setting the foundations of how Africa benefits from the extractive industries and also benefits for its own people in an inclusive manner that is sustainable over the long period, environmentally sustainable from a governance perspective as well.
All right, so what are the big issues?
Thank you.
What are the big issues for Zambia post-COVID? Because we've got to start planning for a period where we start to recover, but also in a world, as you said, that ESG has become more and more of an issue than it has ever been.
So for Zambia in particular, we must keep in mind that 90% of our revenue received by mining and quarrying comes from copper and cobalt mines. We still are in a situation where agriculture is growing, tourism is growing, but we have not fully diversified from mining. So mining remains the lifeblood of Zambia. And so you talk mining, you talk Zambia, you talk Zambia, you talk mining. There are issues that came around with COVID, but we go much deeper than that. In 2021, Zambia produced 800,000 metric tons of copper. That was an increase from around 733 in 2019. Our export earnings in 2021 were about 736 million. However, when you look at the wave that is being ridden today, one has to ask oneself, are we ready to ride this wave? A couple of challenges that we have, and I hope we'll have a moment to talk about the opportunity, but let me put the challenges on the table that we find ourselves sitting on at the moment and what we need to do, and we are doing under the current administration. One is the overarching framework. So the mining and fiscal policies have been inconsistent, unreliable. That does not sit for a good investment environment. Over and above that, we have had energy constraints, and the cost of energy increases the cost of doing business, the cost of investments. We know this story. It's a regional problem. It's not Zambia specific. Thirdly, we have an inadequate infrastructure base to support our mining industry. And all of that is leading to reduced capital investments because of no trust between private sector, public sector, and very little exploration activities, and all of it leading to poor capacity to mine. These are the challenges, but I always say therein lies the opportunity. So I do hope we will also have a chance to talk about where does this lead us to in terms of the current environment, where the trajectory for minerals, given the technology-enabled businesses, whether you're talking about battery-based, whether you're talking about electronic vehicles, all of those things are going to rely on the minerals that are sitting under Africa's feet. Let me put it that way.
All right, let's talk about those opportunities, because when I look at Zambia, mining 10% contribution to GDP, which is a huge contribution. The challenge has been over time is that, much like Nigeria, the price of oil often determines the health of the economy. Minerals, mining, often the same. Where are the opportunities to build sustainable growth that don't fluctuate with the fortunes of the markets?
So I believe that one has got to look at the hindrances that we have just talked about.
Yeah.
But we have a different generation of Africa today. And that different generation of Africa is looking at the importance in the new industry of robotics, as we just spoke about earlier, the importance of the very minerals that abound in this continent, on this continent, particularly Southern Africa, whether you're talking DRC, Tanzania, Zambia. We've got copper, we've got cobalt, we've got nickel, we've got lithium. All of these are critical, manganese critical to the new global world. So for me, the opportunity lies in, first of all, unlocking the challenges that I just mentioned above. And unlocking those challenges required leadership on our part. You will have heard my president speaking today, and the other presidents, in fact, talking about the importance of a new style of leadership in Africa, a style of leadership that takes ownership of what we are endowed with in the minerals and mining area, metals, etc., in order to be at the driving edge of where the next generation goes, where the next technology goes, and adding value. So we have consistently been exporting raw materials. That is not the story we're talking about today. We're talking about adding value to the raw product, exporting that raw value, but we're also talking about inclusive financing, so bringing our communities, particularly women on the gender side, but bringing our communities into the stream through supply chain finance, through SMEs, through all of the inputs into the industry and the outputs that include our own businesses and build our own businesses along the way. So it's a highway along which all the existent and supportive industries and manufacturing companies are accompanying.
All right, I'm going to focus a little bit more on this ESG story. Let's talk about environment, because mining traditionally has been really dirty, high carbon intensive. And I just wonder, as you plot the course forward, can we transition to a more environmentally friendly environment type of mining, if that exists?
I believe it exists. And I would like to start that although all of us are so caught up in the COVID crisis and the impacts of that, we've been consumed, the attention of mining companies and companies around the world have been consumed by COVID-19. The real threat that faces companies, not just mining companies, is that climate change remains an urgent matter. And why do I say that? Because it affects not only from a physical perspective or a global warming perspective. It affects, for the mining industry, our physical infrastructure. It affects our communities that are overlying. It affects the cost of doing business. It affects the recovery, the cost of recovery after a pandemic. Well, I'm sorry, a climate effect, whether it's drought because mining is water intensive, or whether it's floods because some of your physical infrastructure, as we saw in Tropical Cyclone Ida in Mozambique, wipes away all of your investments. So what are some of the things we can do about this? The language used in the global climate change market is 3 categories of adaptation, mitigation, and resilience, but they cost money. And we just have to factor this in as a cost of doing business. You know, I always say, SABC, that we spend a lot of money investing upfront in health, in education, in schools, in housing. We spend very little on protecting the downside when we have a flood, agriculture, when we have a drought. And therefore, I think there are a couple of things that we can do. One is to follow the Build Back Better principle, which is to protect our physical infrastructure. Second is to offset the risk, which is through insurance options. Today, there are insurance options galore on climate-related disasters. One I would like to mention is the African Risk Capacity, which I worked for before. And the third, from my perspective, none of these are important in any order of importance, but they should be points that we raise, is to absolutely, with the focus, invest in alternative renewable energy resources. They may be off-grid, they may be on-grid. Pleased to announce, as you would have heard today, that in its reset of the relationship between Zambia and First Quantum will be developing a 430 megawatt solar and wind energy project to support their mine in Kansanshi. And then finally, I think we need to follow the principles of inclusion for our communities and the impact of climate on gender. The mining industry, always, wherever they sit, becomes a galvanizing force for the communities in which they operate.
All right, okay. First Quantum, you mentioned that, and today a big announcement, $1.25 billion investment. And it speaks to one issue that we've had challenges with over time, and that is the involvement of overseas companies in our mining sector, and sometimes at a cost of owning our mining sector. And I just wonder, how do we manage this going forward and in the future, where investment doesn't mean handing over?
One thing I would be very strong about is that when we sit at the table, we must be at the table. So the contracts that we are signing as Africa with our partners globally, we must make sure that those contracts are transparent, are fair, and are in the favor of shareholders on both sides of the table. Now, I believe that there is no way we can do mining unless we have deep, deep pockets to be able to do so. To sink a shaft is $1 billion effort. Zambia's GDP today is $4 billion, give or take. There is no way that we can afford to operate without having a partnership. One, on the mining capacity. Now, that partnership does not have to necessarily come from outside of Africa. South Africa itself has been mining for decades and years. Like Zambia, it is built on the mining industry, albeit different minerals. There is expertise there to be shared, and it is already happening. So First Quantum, for example, are out of Zimbabwe. So I think as Africa, we must focus on using the African expertise. Why are our commodities being traded in London when they're being mined and produced? The raw material sits under our feet. So I think one is for us to be at the table with the voice and to be prepared in our negotiations. I think secondly is to think about the sustainability of our own societies and economies and Africa as a whole as we craft these agreements. And I think thirdly is for Africa to come with one voice. If you have a strand of copper in DRC, likely that at Kasumbalesa border, wherever it is where we border Kolwezi, you are going to have a strand of copper in Zambia. Let us see how we can use that collaboration. In trade, we call it AFCA, but the integrated approach of Africa is going to be very, very important, even as we need the billions that are required to sink. As a continent, we do not have that billion, and it's something that we should accept and just say, we are coming to the table, we have the raw material, we have the good, we have the asset, you have the financial capital and investment. Somewhere in between must be a fair and sustainable agreement.
Ms. Banda, thank you so much indeed for joining us. Really been a pleasure talking to you, and we wish you the best with the rest of the Indaba and the fruits that you might be able to take back home. Thank you so much.
Thank you. And if I may, in the last minute, I'd like to say never again should Zambia and never again should Africa be caught lagging behind the market opportunity as we are now.
Zikomo Kwambiri, thank you.
Yeah, Zikomo. Ngiyabonga kakhulu.
Siyabonga.